Welcome back to another episode of the Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. Very exciting guest today, Pierre-Alexander Fournier. Pierre, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me, Mike.
No, I appreciate you joining. For those of you that aren't familiar with Pierre, he's the co-founder and CEO of a really exciting technology company called Hexoskin. They make smart garments and also have an associated technology data platform. But in speaking with him earlier, they're really in the data business. It would definitely be appropriate to call it a digital biomarker company rather than a smart garment company for sure. I've been following the company now for several years. Pierre, I was telling you just a second ago, I was waiting for somebody to come out with something like this ever since Tom Brady came out with the recovery pajamas that he kind of made famous, and it's just makes perfectly good sense. So I'm excited to have you on the show today and get to talk about the exciting technology you guys are bringing forward.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, so why don't we start by just having you I always like to get a little bit of the origin story of how things got started, how you got involved in this, and then we can kind of get into the technology.
Yes, so we started the company, we incorporated the company a little bit more than 15 years ago. I think we were very early and very ambitious, but a bit naive about what was going on in the healthcare industry. We came from a machine learning AI background, and we thought, we need to use these new tools in AI to solve the big problems in our society. And one of the big problems is the problems related to aging healthcare, access to healthcare, chronic disease. So we said, okay, we're going to start an AI for healthcare company. And then we filed the papers and everything. And then we did our market study. So not something I recommend. And then we realized that the data we were looking for didn't exist. It was 2006, 2007.
Yeah, that was really early on.
EHRs were not widely used. And all the efforts to build EHRs were to scan the papers first, and data was not very accessible. And anyways, the data that people were planning to use and collect in the EHR was data from patients already in the hospital. That was not what we were looking for. We were looking for daily health data that could indicate a trend, manifest symptoms, silent symptoms that we could detect in advance so that we could trigger an intervention that would prevent an hospital admission. So that's what we had in mind. So then we said, we need to develop a device to get that type of data. Ideally, that device is as passive as possible. We were thinking that even keeping a journal of what you eat to do weight loss, for example, is just too much of a burden for most people.
Right.
So even that was not something that we would consider. We thought ideally it's completely passive, no maintenance. It's something that people know how to use and don't have to learn how to use. So we've worked on different types of sensors, and we kind of started with the traditional biomedical engineering approach, designing the electronics and then sticking it on people or making it, strapping it on an arm. And then we realized that we want to collect longitudinal long-term data. These are not form factors.
That's the only way you'll get real trustable data.
Yeah, and these were not form factors that people would accept over the long term. Cables, adhesives, and all that. So we thought, okay, let's take a step back. We need to think about things a different way. So we thought, ideally, we hide the sensors into objects that are already part of your life. And then we've considered everything, like jewelry, shoes, and like belts and different types of garments. But because we were focusing on the cardiac and respiratory system, it just made sense that the hardware part of the product became a smart shirt. So a base layer shirt, a tank top, a bra, these kind of garments. So you have access to the skin, you have access to a lot of real estate on the upper body where the vital organs are, and you have direct access to the skin to do things like ECG using these garments. So we've developed these garments, and then at first, we were still early. So that was like 2010, 2011, we had the garments, we were trying them, we were working with researchers to collect data. It was still too early for healthcare. There was no business model for remote patient monitoring. The home care business was not very developed in terms of diagnostics and telemedicine. So we've decided, because there was a lot of interest for wearable tech at the time, we've decided to try to launch a product with a crowdfunding campaign in a version that was not a medical device. So that hobbyists could use it, try different things, and then basically the approach was let's throw it out there and see where it sticks. And we've launched it with an open API, so people had access to all the data. Our approach was always very transparent. This is not a black box. This is something that you can see everything that's going on in there, the raw data, the noise, everything. It's completely transparent. So we've started like that, but we still had our research projects going on. We've did some mileage. And then in 2015, we had our first research paper published in a peer-reviewed paper. It was an independent paper done by the University of Waterloo. And it was a validation paper showing that basically the device was accurate and was doing what was promised. And then at that time, we've realized that most of our business actually was not consumer or athletes or anything like that. It was people involved in clinical research. So we had people in various universities, research hospitals using our devices. We had people in the defense sector, in aerospace.
Aerospace, yeah.
We had already started working with the NASA and the Canadian Space Agency in 2011. So by that time, we decided, okay, well, we've learned a lot about the consumer. Now let's focus on clinical research while we prepare the next generation of product that is going to become an FDA cleared medical grade device that doctors can prescribe to patients. So we can finally do that thing that we intended to do at the start, meaning provide services to a large number of patients and collect data along the way, and then develop AI software or digital biomarkers so that we can develop new ways to care for these patients from home and keep them out of the hospital.
It's interesting because if I'm doing my math correctly, you guys were really early, man. This was before Obamacare even came into play, which, in my opinion, I call products like this the Obamacare products, because when I was coming up through the system on the industry side, everybody always told me stay on the therapeutic side. Therapeutics is where the money is. There's no money in diagnostics. And then Obamacare hit, and that changed everything. It was early diagnosis, lower readmissions, early intervention. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, value-based care, all of those things. And all of a sudden, at that point, diagnostics became in vogue. And it became in vogue, I always say, follow the money, because it became very in vogue because those were the technologies that CMS started reimbursing heavily on. And so they were, trying to reduce the focus on the therapeutic side. But man, you guys were really early on that trend. But it was probably fortuitous because it takes some time to develop all of that, and then kind of the system caught up with you guys, so to speak, while you guys were developing the technology, it sounds like.
Yes, we were early. We were very early, but not too early, in the sense that if you're too early, you cannot even develop a sustainable business based on it.
Right.
We were early for healthcare, but we were, I think, we had the right timing in the sense that we started developing the product when the App Store was launched. So we were the first smart garment for health monitoring that was made for iPhone,
really?
And that had a made for iPhone license. So we got there first, and then we built on that infrastructure that didn't exist before 2008. Because before 2008, and even like in 2009 and 2010, we were developing for iPhone, and people were telling us, you guys are making a mistake. All the people with the money have Blackberries. You should be developing for Blackberry.
Right.
And we said, no, we're developing for iPhone. This is the right approach. And with Insight, it was a good bet, and it was great timing to build on top of that new infrastructure where suddenly everyone had internet in their pocket, and they would carry internet with them, and we could just piggyback on that to build our smart garment platform.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, no, everybody's got a personal computer in their pocket now. Yeah, and I remember back around that time frame, there was a little pod that you could buy for Nike shoes, running shoes, that you could put, I think it was called Nike Fit, I think is what it was called, I don't know. Anyways, yes. You used to pull the insole up, and you could it was a little pedometer basically, and then you'd put the insole back down. And I think that was around that time. So that makes sense, because I always like to say that regulated industries get disrupted last. So if that was occurring in other industries, then obviously factor that out. Makes sense that healthcare would eventually catch up with you guys, which is really, it's neat to see that it all kind of came together at the right time. So why don't you walk us through let's talk about the garments first, and then we can talk about the platform in a minute. Walk us through the technology of the garments. What do they do? What biomarkers do they measure? How does it all work?
Yes, so the garments that we sell, so the Hexoskin garments have three types of sensors. They have cardiac sensors. We have inside the shirt pieces of conductive fabrics that act as ECG electrodes. So there's nothing that sticks to your skin. There's nothing hard. It's all flexible and stretchable, but it's conductive like a piece of metal, basically. But it's a piece of fabric. So we use these ECG electrode to derive an ECG signal and look at heart rhythm, so heart rate variability, these kind of things. Then something very special that we have in the shirt is that we have these two bands at the thoracic and abdominal level that measure the variation in shape of your upper body. So when you breathe from your rib cage or from your belly, we can differentiate that, and we can measure breathing rate very accurately. And we have a pretty good idea of your ventilation as well. So tidal volume, minute ventilation, these kind of metrics. And this is very unique. But products that measure breathing patterns, like you can do with Hexoskin shirts, I'm not aware of any other product on the market that can do that today. So that's very unique, and we're doing groundbreaking stuff, groundbreaking research in terms of continuous respiratory monitoring with patients with COPD and other respiratory disease. There's a lot of good things that will come out of this. And then we have a 3D accelerometer. So we do actigraphy, and we can measure things like steps, of course, and step cadence, but also sleep positions and these kind of things. And that's very precise. And we record all the raw data from all these sensors. So it's really continuous measurements. And like if we tell you took 5,000 steps today, we can tell you exactly where we saw these steps. We can give you a timestamp for every one of these steps. So it's a very precise platform, very accurate and very high resolution continuous data.
That is great. Why did you guys choose the clothing piece? I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but why did you choose to go with a shirt versus, was it really just because that covered the areas that you wanted to measure the vitals from primarily? And why a shirt versus undergarment like a bra or something like that for a female? Was there one specific reason?
Well, in the female version, there's a bra inside the tank top, so it's really made to be worn as the first layer on your skin. And we've tried other form factors, but these are the best we found. We have a lot of things in the lab being developed still today, and most of the things that we develop we never launched, so people never see it. So we've done over 100 iterations on different types of garments since we started. There's a lot of knowledge there, and we try to make the garments look very simple, and people look at them and they think it's very simple, but in fact it's very, very complex to design and put into production as a product. We've thought about, in terms of design, we've thought about things that people already use. And one of the things that we had in mind when we thought about clothing is that everybody's getting dressed every day. No matter how old you are, how sick you are, at lunch, everybody's dressed. If you can do it yourself, somebody does it for you. So this is something that should fit in the normal, daily life of everyone. That's how we saw it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You want to make it, in order for a technology to work. Because one of the downsides to wearables is only as good as the compliance of the user. The data is only as good as the compliance of the user. And so, if a patient takes their watch off, sets it down at night, doesn't put it back on the next morning, you're going to get an incomplete data set. They forget to charge that watch that night, they're going to get an incomplete data set, it's not going to be the data is not going to be as pure as something like this, that if they're just wearing it 24/7 and constantly monitoring. So that makes perfectly good sense. So what's the use case in health? What are the use cases in healthcare? So we get the data, right? Where would this be indicated? Like, would it be? You had mentioned COPD. What types of physicians might say, "Hey, I want you to wear this garment so that we can collect this data"? Is it cardiology? What are the use cases?
I think we're not the typical med tech company. You know, a lot of companies develop one product for one indication, and it's all well contained in one story. We have more of a platform approach. The Hexoskin platform is a platform for digital biomarker development, and you can develop digital biomarkers for a wide range of conditions and make it into diagnostic products if you need to, and if the FDA allows you and accept your data. So the way we see it is that at first we're looking at this as a platform mostly for Holter diagnostics, so cardiac diagnostics, and for post-acute monitoring. So let's say you had heart surgery, you go back home, physicians want to monitor you for a certain period of time. That monitoring can be used for at-home cardiac rehab, pulmonary rehab. I think that there's a sweet spot for smart clothing between 1 and 6 months of use from the patient, where the data is very valuable and the patient is very compliant. Makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of value there that cannot really be captured with other products today. Because if you look at other solutions for ECG monitoring, on one side you have the adhesive, and they are great products. ECG patches that can last 3 or 7 days. You just stick it on, you get your data. Hopefully it's usable data and not too noisy. And so you have a lot of products on the adhesive side, but patients won't stick another one and another one for 3 months or 6 months. You get rashes. You get patients don't like that. And on the other side, you have implantables. You can implant a small implantable cardiac monitor in between 2 ribs, but it can last 2-3 years. And compliance is very high because it's implanted for the 99% of the people who don't get an infection following surgery. But the thing is, it's very expensive. It's between $7,000 and $12,000, and that's not a pacemaker. That's just a monitoring device.
That's just a monitoring device, yeah.
And I think a lot of patients would rather wear a shirt than getting surgery to get the diagnostics.
Sure.
So that's 1 to 6 months time frame. That's great, like post-acute care for medium-term monitoring for therapy, for example. There's a lot of use cases in that time frame that work for us in the short term.
Yeah, and even I could even see, like a lot of these respiratory patients getting discharged from the hospital, and maybe they're going to go see their specialist 4 weeks out, right? And you want to be able to minimize readmission. You want to be able to, I call it gap care. What happens in that gap, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that could be.
And I'm very passionate about that, actually. The patients with a respiratory issue, a respiratory disease, because on the ECG side, you have about 50 companies competing for ECG monitoring solution. On the respiratory side, there's nobody. There's no Holter for the lungs today. There's no continuous lung monitoring solutions for home. So let's say you're that 83-year-old patient, 3 hours driving from Denver in Colorado, and you're supposed to go to your 4-week appointment. Maybe it's easier for you to do an online appointment, to do telehealth. But then if you do telehealth, how do you assess what's happening with the patient? You need devices. You need devices at home. And I think we can provide a very compelling solution for this category of patient. That is, and it's a huge segment. It's 800,000 people hospitalized for COPD exacerbation in the US every year, and there's no monitoring solution for them.
You're right. Yeah. No, that's a really, really great application for it. I could think of several, like you said, post-cardiac surgery, even post-robotic cardiac surgery, even though it's not super invasive. Those patients, especially, they're trying to ambulate patients home. And I think, if you really take a step back and look at this from a bigger perspective, it touches on one of the things I've been writing about a lot on LinkedIn, which is the transition of care to the home. They want to get people out of the hospital. They want to get them home and then try to provide equivalent, if not better, care from the home. And so this might be, could play a big role in that.
Yeah, we hear that a lot. We have chief medical officers telling us we have to free up beds. We don't have the staff for the beds.
That's right.
Can we discharge these patients 1 or 2 days earlier, but then still keep that continuity in monitoring at home? Because there's a lot of patients who are kept in the hospital just for observation and not because they're receiving treatments anymore.
Right.
I think solutions like Hexoskin Shirt, once we get FDA clearance, will be able to provide part of the solution for these patients. And other companies, other devices will provide other tools so that patients have better access to care.
Sure. Yeah, like we discussed before we started filming, it's just like the cardiovascular world, there's, you take the atherectomy market, there's no silver bullet in that market. There's a bunch of different devices. They all have their niche of certain roles that they fulfill in the physician's toolbox in terms of, administering care. And all these devices are going to be similar. They're going to be complementary. They're going to be supplemental to each other. And there's not going to be one device that does it all. But hopefully there'll be enough of them that we can get the goal accomplished. Let's talk a little bit about the connected health platform, the Hexoskin connected health platform. Let's shift from the garments to that side of the business, because I got to think that's played a kind of a key role in facilitating the data side of this thing, right?
Yes. Yeah, we've talked a lot about the sensors and the garment, but we're really a data company. In the end, people don't really care that it's a shirt. They have questions and they want answers. You want to have a diagnostic for your patient. You want to know how your patient is recovering from surgery. You want to know how the patient is managing his or her condition, if the treatment, the drugs they've been prescribed, for example, has the intended effect. So for that, it's not just having a device, but you want to automate everything between the data collection from the device to the point where the data is available in processed form in an EHR, and the doctor can just glance at it and say, okay, everything's okay, everything looks fine, or there's something we should be doing here. So that's why we've built that cloud-based platform, so that the patient who doesn't have to know much, they're just wearing the shirt. The shirt talks to a phone or base station that transmit the data to our cloud, and we process the information. We have tools to manage cohorts of patients or cohorts of participants for virtual clinical trials, and then we can automate the processing of that information, which is necessary because we collect huge quantities of data. We can collect gigabytes of vital signs data from a patient over the course of a few weeks, and then we synthesize it, we summarize it, and then we can we can push the result in an EHR, like a 2-page report of what's going on today, what's going on this week. And then from the physician standpoint, the experience is, I'm prescribing monitoring to this patient. I want to answer these questions. And then on the other side, the physician receives the answer to the question. A little bit like they notice something about you, they say, oh, let's do blood work. From the physician's standpoint, they prescribe blood work, and then the lab takes care of you. And then the physician gets the result back. The same thing for connected health. That's exactly how we see connected health. So we can quickly get on board with physician. We use a workflow that they're comfortable with, that they've used all their life. But then suddenly they can serve millions of patients at home that they couldn't before because the tool was just not available.
And so basically they'll just say, I want to know what the heart rate was, ECG, oxygen level, or whatever. They just tell you what they want, and then you guys spit the data back to them, right?
Yeah, so they might want an ECG report, like Holter style. They might want to know if the patient is compliant to the rehabilitation program, and how does the heart rate and breathing rate look like when they're doing their exercises.
Because they'll be able to tell that they've been doing exercises.
Yeah. And then
interesting.
Like I was talking with we've done some work with cardiologists on assessing frailty in patients with angina pain. Yeah. And one of the things they were saying is that patients with angina pain, they adjust their level of physical activity to their pain. So you might be treating the pain and it works, and they become more active until they reach the same threshold, and then they come back, and then you ask them, do you still feel pain? And then they'll say, well, yes, I feel the same pain as before. But in reality, they're walking more steps, they're less exhausted, the treatment works. And the opposite is true too. If you're treating another patient with angina pain, it doesn't work, it gets worse. They'll just reduce their physical activity to reach the same threshold, and you won't even notice that they're not getting better, they're getting worse, because if you just ask about their pain, they'll say it's the same. But if you have information about their heart rate, about their physical activity levels, all that context, then suddenly you can have a much richer and more objective conversation with your patient, and the patient receive better care.
Yeah, it takes a lot of the variables, unknowns out of the equation, right? That's That's neat. That's really, really neat. So where are you guys at regulatory-wise? Where are you at in the pathway?
So we're still working with the FDA to get clearance on our device so that it can be prescribed. We hope it happens this year. I'd say it's not a traditional device in many aspects. So we've tried to simplify everything, but it still was a lot to process for us and for the FDA. But I think the discussion is progressing pretty well. So
how is that?
We can't wait to have these things in the hands of patients.
I bet. How is that process with the FDA? Because I had this same conversation with Connor Landgraf from Echo. They were early with their AI disease detection platform, and the FDA didn't really have a predicate device to base it off of, and so much of what they were doing with the FDA was, the FDA was kind of figuring it out at the same time that Echo was. And I got to think that was probably a fairly similar situation for you here, because there's not a whole lot out there like this. I mean, there's obviously wearables that have FDA approval, but how was that process working with them? Was it a difficult process, or how did you find their how were they in terms of engagement in the process?
Well, in general, I have good things to say about the FDA. They're very professional and having the right data to support it. And that's key. You need to collect a lot of data to support your rationale. And for Hexoskin, one of the challenges is that it's not just another ECG. It's an ECG, but with a different form factor, with different materials, but also with a breathing monitor. So it's kind of a bundle of two things. So it's more like it's like filing for multiple devices at the same time.
Right.
So that makes it less straightforward than if you just file for another blood pressure cuff, for example.
No, that's neat. That's neat. I want to be sensitive to get you out of here on time, but one last question for you here. Are you guys looking at any line extensions in terms of platform, or in terms of different garments that you might get into, or any other, new technologies that you've got coming down the pipe?
Yeah, so we're working on different garments. We do have another product that has more sensors called the Hexoskin that is being used in research, and that's the product that is being used in the space station right now for different research projects in microgravity. It's also the Hexoskin is also what Chris Hemsworth is wearing in Limitless with Chris Hemsworth on Disney Plus.
Oh yeah,
it's streaming right now. Yeah, great show about technology, health, and longevity. By the way,
yeah,
I recommend
I've
it.
had that. My son, my 17-year-old, and I have been saying that we want to watch that together, and so I purposefully have not watched it yet because we haven't had time to sit down and actually binge through it. But I couldn't wait. I can't wait to watch that show. It looks like it's amazing. The trailer, they did a great job with the trailer. Yeah,
very well made. And for the Hexoskin medical platform, we've been working with many research groups. Actually, that's our business. We sell the platform to research groups, and they're doing amazing things. We have people working on developing new digital biomarkers for rare diseases. We have groups working on ME/CFS, so chronic fatigue, which got we started working with them 5-6 years ago, and then it got really big because of COVID. A lot of long COVID people have that kind of syndrome that still doesn't have a clear diagnosis and still doesn't have a clear treatment path. We've been working with people with PTSD, mental health a lot, epilepsy. So there's a lot of stuff that is going to come out. I've built the largest database of vital signs data about that specific health condition that exists. So there's a lot of things that will come out of it. And like I said earlier, we're not just building a product for single use. Eventually, we're going to add blocks to that platform so that it can be used for several types of disease. And it's going to become a great bundle for people with comorbidities. So for example, most COPD patients. So that bundle of breathing monitoring and cardiac monitoring makes a lot of sense for millions of patients today. Other things too, they could have mental health issues, they could have other types of health issues, and the more we can put all the digital biomarkers on the same platform, the more services patients will be able to get from a single device. And that's how we see the future for smart clothing and Hexoskin.
The market is only going to increase exponentially for these types of technologies, especially like you said, is if you can continue to add capabilities into that technology, then you're opening yourself up to new markets every day. Thanks again. I really appreciate you coming on, Pierre. It's one of the things that I think, is kind of one of my takeaways from this is new things are hard. And I commend you and your team for, starting early and sticking to it and really persevering through those tough times when technology or when healthcare wasn't quite there for you guys yet, but being able to, keep your focus on that vision and ultimately, hopefully this will end in a huge success story with FDA approval, and really look forward to seeing it hopefully get to be commercialized here in the U.S. So thank you again for coming on the show, and maybe after approval, maybe we can get you back on for an update at some point.
Yeah, that would be great.
Well, that's it for this episode of The Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys next time. Thanks, Pierre.
Thank you, Mike.